Could a rebel militia defeat the U.S. Army? That question popped into my mind after I saw a tweet by Ed Krasenstein. He's an NFT peddler, an internet provocateur, and let's just say, not exactly Clausewitz here. He wrote, "If you honestly think you can fight off the government with your guns, you are delusional." Now, this opinion isn't just wrong, it's historically illiterate and dangerously overconfident. Now, some people make jokes about it. And while this joke is funny, especially to people who don't know much about insurgencies or logistics, it's a laugh that's based on ignorance. So this video is for that aunt or uncle of yours who has expressed such an opinion at Thanksgiving dinner. But first, you know what I'm thankful for? Ground news. Memorial Day is right around the corner. That means family get-togethers, and in today's political climate, arguments. My father's 86 years old. Have you ever spoken to someone in their 80s? Not a lot you can do to change their mind on something, but maybe you can chip away at it. Look, just today, the U.S. formally accepted a luxury jet from Qatar to use as Air Force One. If you go to Ground News, you'll see how the story is being covered on both the left and the right. Now, you look at this story here from the New York Post, you'll see who owns the publication, the factuality rating of the publication, and the publication's political bias. And this is really important, because instead of arguing with your parents, you can just show them the data. And this blind spot report is critical as well, because if your parents lean left or lean right, it can show them stories that they may have missed. For example, if you lean left, you may not have seen a story that states France is determined to recognize a Palestinian state. If you lean right, you may not have seen that Colombia lost about 90,000 hectares of forest in the past 6 months. I actually pay for Ground News myself, and for my dad, they don't give it to me for free. That's how much I value it. So click the link in the description below, hit the QR code, or go to ground.news/Ryan to get 40% off the Vantage plan. It's a great value for a peaceful Memorial Day with your parents. Now, first I have to start out by saying that if it was impossible for militia or rebels to defeat a government, there never would have been any rebel takeover of any government anywhere. No American Revolution, no Russian Revolution, no Chinese Civil War, no Vietnam, no Afghanistan. Twice. No Libyan revolution, no Syrian revolution. So when someone like Ed Krasenstein says, if you honestly think you can fight the government off with your guns, you're delusional, he's already ignoring history. But maybe he means that the U.S. is special, that the militia force could never hope to win against the U.S. military. Okay, I guess nobody told the Viet Cong and the Taliban they were supposed to lose, but okay, let's go down this path. First, we have to define what win means. And win for the government and win for the rebels are actually two different criteria. So, for the government, win means restoration of central authority and government legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Now, there's really only two victory conditions here. So that sounds pretty easy, right? So, what does a win look like for militia forces or rebel forces? Well, a win can look like survival, or winning the narrative, or legitimacy as a shadow government, or perpetual resistance as an end state, or forcing the government to quit. Here's the difference, though. The government victory is an and. It needs to have restoration of central authority and government legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Whereas a rebel win can be any one of these things: survival, winning the narrative, legitimacy, perpetual resistance, or forcing the government to quit. It can be any one of those things. So this is an or. And that's a big deal. You know, there's this quote from Paradise Lost where Satan says, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And to me, the scariest thing on this list for the rebels is the number 4 victory condition. This is terrifying. Perpetual resistance as an end state. Because that's what we're seeing right now in Gaza. Hamas is never, ever, ever going to push every Jew into the sea. That may be their dream, but it's not Hamas's goal. Their goal is resistance for the sake of resistance. Resistance for the sake of staying in power. Ruling in hell rather than serving in heaven. Israel can drop as many bombs as they want. They can flatten every building. But if perpetual resistance is the end state, Israel will never win. So now let's take a look at another element which is super important, and that's logistics. I covered this when I did a review of that Civil War movie from 2024. So some of you who watched that, this might sound a little familiar. Now, in that Civil War 2024 movie, you had Rebel M1 tanks, you had like an entire brigade get air assaulted into Washington, D.C., along with Apaches for escort. They also had F-22s in the attacks. At that point in the movie, I think that the rebellion or the war had been going on for like a year. And the truth is that, you know what? If some citizens rebelled for about 1 to 3 months, the U.S. Army would wipe the floor with the rebels. They'd wipe the floor with them. And then the logistical bottlenecks would start. Because all it takes is a few truck drivers who won't move, a few machinists who walk off the Boeing assembly line, and the U.S. Army stops. The U.S. Army is a logistics organization that dabbles in combat. One story I like to tell is how I was on this remote combat outpost in Egypt, and we had so many frozen chicken patties in our freezer that we actually gave the Egyptians some frozen chicken patties because the Egyptian border guards only got meat when they rotated back into their main base. We could get more chicken halfway across the world than we could possibly eat, and the Egyptians couldn't even feed their own men in their own country. It's fun to say that Army helicopters and drones would just blow the rebels to pieces, but when the parts stop coming, that really evens the playing field. A lot of Army equipment and fuel is shipped by civilian contractors. If you got a contractor who's refusing to move without a military escort, or all of his drivers quit because they support the rebels, or there's just no gas, you've just turned that Apache helicopter into a $52 million wind chime. And when it comes to parts, maintainers are going to cannibalize one helicopter for parts to keep the other helicopters going. So a squadron of multiple helicopters can turn into 3 helicopters real quick. Same thing goes for jet fighters. Ground vehicles like trucks, tanks, they might fare a little bit better since the consequences of a jury-rigged part might be less catastrophic than if you're on the ground than if you're in the air. You might also be able to find more parts at your local Napa than you can for a jet fighter, right? But for the most part, if the parts or the gas stops coming, that really reduces the ability for the Army to project power. Now, in general, the Army does have better training and equipment and leadership than a militia force. Absolutely. The fact is that a lot of these people like to cosplay, dress up in their plate carrier with a Hawaiian shirt every weekend and run around with the AR-15 and play pretend militia. I mean, yeah, it's great to have a hobby. But in a stand-up fight, your training as part-time militia, your 3-gun matches, you will never be at parity with someone who does this 5 days a week and they intend to kill. Now, that doesn't mean that the Army can't be defeated. It just means that anybody who intends to fight as militia cannot get decisively engaged, where better training and leadership can be brought to bear. So if some sort of rebellion happened and it was in one central location, the full force of the military could be brought to bear and it would be over pretty quick. But if there was some sort of insurgency that rose up in multiple locations all at the same time, and those insurgents could hold out for maybe 90 days or so, long enough for parts to be delayed and fuel shortages to start, that's when I think the government would start to have problems. You're also ignoring the fact that some government forces will break off and form their own rebel groups. You saw this with the Free Syrian Army, where defectors started fighting the government. You could also see mass desertions. Now, the culture of the U.S. Army is pretty stoic. We tend to suffer a lot of hardships, and we suck it up. But there are things like supply interruptions. If the government can't pay their soldiers, either because of contract issues or logistical issues, or people can't get fed, people are going to leave. I will tell you this. If it got down to the point that, let's say you have a bunch of soldiers at some remote outpost and the Army wasn't feeding them, the average American officer would reach into their own pocket and buy food on the economy to feed their soldiers. No doubt that would happen. But they can only do that for so long before they run out of money on their credit card, right? So no matter how great the discipline is of the U.S. Army, you would still see soldiers start to desert their units. Some might even join the rebels. Some might just go home and protect their families. And then there's the issue of recruiting. The U.S. Army needs about 68,000 or so incoming troops every year to keep up their strength. If the militia is fighting for a cause that people believe in, corruption, food shortages, civil liberties, whatever, you'll lose not just logistics, but hearts and minds. Because now the military is a villain. And it's really hard to recruit soldiers to be the villain. That means you're going to have to conscript, which could make people side with the militias even more. They took my son. Now, there's also the question of the OG militia, which is the National Guard. Look, the National Guard is first and foremost a state force. I am finishing my second novel in the Deseret series, and it's called Lies to Rule Men. I'm recording this particular video in April for a May release, so the first book in the series, The Last Republic, should be available at Amazon and Audible right now. Lies to Rule Men is about a full-scale U.S. invasion of Deseret. I wargamed this thing 6 ways till Sunday. I can't make it work without the National Guard. The National Guard is just too critical of a force and power projection device to fight a major conflict without them. But the National Guard is controlled by their state governors. If there are any state governors in this scenario who agree with the militia's grievances, they might not send troops to help the federal government. And if some of these state governors are loyalists, they might agree with the government. They might be interested in sending troops, but they might not send their National Guard troops because they might want to use them to suppress dissent in their own state. So at the end of the day, whenever somebody brings this up, I want you to think about the 3 L's. Logistics, legitimacy, longevity. The militia doesn't need to win. The government just has to stop fighting. And that's kind of what makes this question so much more complicated than it seems. And hey, if you want to support the channel, grab The Last Republic from Amazon. It's a fiction book that's alternate history, kind of like The Guns of the South or Man in the High Castle, the Draco series. It kind of imagines what would have happened if Brigham Young created his own country in the middle of the U.S. instead of the Utah Territory, and what happens when America doesn't want them to have that country anymore. That's available on Amazon. You can get some of my Squadron t-shirts as well at Bunker Branding, along with some pretty awesome patches. I would love someone at the Hill Air Force Base to take a picture next to an F-16 with this patch. Thank you guys so much for watching. Wow, this girl from Watertown sure is cool. Hey kid, what's going on? Think tank! You know, a girl from Watertown is kind of like riding a moped. It's lots of fun till your friends see you on one. What's really cool is a t-shirt or hoodie from Bunker Branding. Wow! Intel Life! Control-C, Control-V! That's exactly what we do! And Bunker Branding has all sorts of cool gear. Intel Life, Air Assault, Live, Laugh, Launch for Destroyer, Trident, HIMARS, and Patriot. Think outside the bomb. Drone Suite Drone, Department of the Boat People, landmines, and even the tow missile. It would behoove you to grab one today. Girls from Watertown aren't cool, so wear your Bunker Branding gear. Now I know. And knowing's half the battle. Hey babe, you wanna dance? Bunker Branding!